You are listening to Unseen Givens by Elton Thomas. Part 8, Chapters 29 through 32. Chapter 29, Mr. Hendrick's Full Confession. Part 1, The Unspoken Connection. The quiet hum of the office surrounded Laura, a faint backdrop to the intensity of her thoughts as she prepared for her meeting with Mr. Hendrick. She hadn't expected the day to carry such a weight, but something in her gut told her that this conversation would change everything. The journey of recent weeks, the revelation of her past as Melly, the slow unveiling of hidden memories, her reunion with Ross, had opened up parts of herself she'd kept buried, and now she felt the pull of a final, long-buried truth. As she approached Mr. Hendrick's office, Laura took a deep breath, steadying herself as she knocked lightly on the door. There was a brief pause before his voice called out, welcoming her inside, and she opened the door to find him standing by the window, his back to her as he gazed out at the city skyline. The light streaming through the window cast a warm glow over the room, softening the sharp angles of the furniture and lending an almost ethereal quality to the space. For a moment, she hesitated, struck by the somber atmosphere, the quiet weight of unspoken words that hung in the air between them. "Laura," he said, turning to face her with a gentle smile that held a hint of sadness. "Thank you for coming. I know. This conversation has been a long time coming." She nodded, her heart racing as she took a seat across from him, her hands clasped in her lap as she met his gaze. There was something in his eyes, a mix of regret and vulnerability, that hinted at the depths of what he was about to share, and she felt a strange blend of anticipation and apprehension building within her. For a moment, they sat in silence, the quiet stretching between them as he seemed to gather his thoughts. He looked down, his fingers tapping lightly against the edge of the desk, a slight tremor in his hands as he finally began to speak. "Laura," he began, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you, something I've carried with me for years. I was there, at the scene of the accident. I was the one who tried to save your son, Hank." The words hung in the air, stark and unadorned, and Laura felt her breath catch, her heart pounding as a rush of memories flooded her mind. The accident, the darkness, the quiet hum of chaos around her, and the warmth of a hand, the steady, comforting presence that had held her in those final moments, offering her a glimpse of solace in the midst of unimaginable pain. She looked up at Mr. Hendrick's, her eyes wide as the realization settled over her, a truth that had lingered in the shadows of her memory finally coming into the light. She opened her mouth, her voice barely a whisper as she spoke. "It was you," she murmured, her gaze locked onto his, a mixture of awe and sorrow filling her eyes. "You were there. You were the one who held my hand, who gave me warmth when I thought I couldn't go on." Mr. Hendrick's eyes softened, a flicker of surprise and relief crossing his face as he took in her words. "Yes, Laura," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "It was me. I tried to save him, but He broke off, his voice trembling as he looked away, a haunted look in his eyes. Laura felt a surge of empathy, a deep, aching sorrow that filled her as she watched him, the weight of his regret palpable in the quiet of the room. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm, her touch gentle, reassuring. "You were there," she whispered, her voice steady as she met his gaze. "You were there when I needed someone most. I don't remember much, but I remember the warmth of your hand, the way you stayed with me, even though you couldn't save him. You gave me a reason to hold on, to keep going. And that meant everything." A tear slipped down his cheek, and he wiped it away quickly, his gaze filled with a mixture of gratitude and grief as he looked at her. I never knew if I had made any difference. I felt like I had failed, like I had let you down in the worst possible way. Every day since then, I've carried that regret, that feeling of helplessness, wondering if there was more I could have done." Laura shook her head, her voice firm as she squeezed his arm gently. "You did more than you could ever know. You were there, when no one else was. In that moment, you were my lifeline, my hope. And though I lost Hank, you gave me the strength to survive, to face a world without him." He looked down, his hands trembling as he struggled to compose himself, the weight of her words filling him with a profound sense of relief, a release from the guilt he had carried for so long. They sat in silence for a moment, the air thick with the intensity of their shared grief, their connection deepened by the truth that had finally been spoken. After a pause, he looked up, his gaze steady, filled with a quiet determination. "Laura, I need you to know that not a day has gone by when I haven't thought about that night, about you and Hank. I may not have known who you were, not at first, but when I realized that the woman I had hired was the mother of the child I couldn't save, it felt like fate had given me a second chance, a chance to make things right somehow." Laura smiled, a soft, bittersweet expression as she placed her hand over his, her touch gentle, filled with empathy. "You've already made things right, Mr. Hendricks. Just by being here, by sharing this with me. I never knew who you were, but I felt your presence, even after all these years. And now I know. And that's enough." They sat together in silence, their hands clasped, the quiet of the room filling with the unspoken emotions that lingered between them. It was a moment of healing, a release from the shadows of the past, a chance to finally let go of the guilt and sorrow that had bound them. As they sat there, the warmth of their shared connection wrapping around them like a comforting embrace, Laura felt a sense of peace settling within her, a quiet acceptance that soothed the ache of her loss, the burden of her memories. She looked at Mr. Hendricks, her gaze filled with gratitude, with compassion, as she spoke. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet strength. "For everything. For being there. For giving me warmth when I needed it most. And for sharing this with me. It means more than you could ever know." He nodded, a soft smile tugging at his lips as he looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "And thank you, Laura, for forgiving me a chance to make peace with the past." They shared a final, quiet look, a sense of understanding passing between them, a bond forged in the fires of shared grief and healing. And as Laura rose to leave, her heart felt lighter, her steps filled with a newfound sense of purpose, of clarity. She turned back, offering him a gentle smile, her gaze warm and filled with compassion. "Take care, Mr. Hendricks, and thank you for everything." As she walked out of his office, a quiet sense of closure settled within her, a peace that had eluded her for so long finally taking root. She had found the man who had given her hope in her darkest hour, the one who had held her hand, who had stayed with her when all seemed lost. And now, as she looked back on that memory, she felt a sense of gratitude, a warmth that filled her heart, knowing that even in the depths of her sorrow, there had been light, a kindness that had carried her through. She would never forget Hank, her son who had brought so much joy to her life. But now, she could remember him with love, with a sense of peace, knowing that she had shared his memory with the one person who had been there, who had borne witness to her pain. The past no longer felt like a weight she had to carry alone. It was a part of her, woven into the fabric of her life. But now, it was something she could embrace, something she could cherish without fear, without regret. And as she walked back to her desk, a quiet smile playing on her lips, she knew that she was ready to face the future, to live fully, carrying with her the love and memories of those she had lost, knowing that they would always be a part of her, a light that guided her forward. Part 2. Laura's Path to Closure. The door clicked softly shut behind Laura as she left Mr. Hendricks's office, her mind swirling with thoughts and emotions that felt both familiar and unsettlingly new. The quiet of the hallway enveloped her, a welcome contrast to the weight of the revelation she had just heard. The truth that had unraveled a part of her past she had kept hidden, even from herself. She walked slowly, her footsteps muted on the carpeted floor, her gaze unfocused as she processed the full weight of Mr. Hendricks's confession. each word replaying in her mind like the lingering echo of a distant storm. She had imagined this moment in 100 different ways, had wondered for years about the man who had been there, the stranger whose warmth had given her a thread of hope when she was drowning in grief. But hearing Mr. Hendricks's voice break as he spoke of his regrets, of the guilt he had carried for so long, it was more than she had anticipated, more than she had allowed herself to believe. When she reached her desk, she sat down, her hands folded in her lap as she stared down at the familiar space, the stack of papers, the neatly arranged pens, the framed photograph of Hank she kept tucked just out of sight. She reached for the frame, her fingers brushing against the cool glass as she lifted it, her gaze softening as she looked at her son's smiling face, his wide eyes filled with the innocent joy she remembered so well. A tear slipped down her cheek, the memories rushing back, vivid and raw, each one a thread in the tapestry of love and loss that had woven itself into her heart. She could still feel the pain, the emptiness that had settled over her like a shroud in the days following the accident. The loss of Hank had been a wound that time had never fully healed, a hollow ache that lived in the quiet spaces of her life, in the moments she spent alone, remembering the sound of his laughter, the way he had looked at her with such pure, unwavering trust. But now, there was something else, a warmth, a sense of closure that softened the edges of her sorrow, that made the memories feel less like a weight and more like a gift, a reminder of the love that had bound them together. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes closing as she let herself remember, let herself feel the full weight of her grief and the quiet comfort of knowing that she hadn't been alone in those final moments, that there had been someone beside her, someone who had shared in her loss, her pain. Mr. Hendricks's face filled her mind, the look of regret in his eyes, the vulnerability that had softened his voice as he spoke of that night. She had seen him as her boss, a distant figure, a man driven by ambition and responsibility. But now, she saw something deeper, something that connected them in ways she hadn't expected. He, too, had carried a burden, a wound that had shaped his life, his choices. And as she remembered the tremor in his voice, the tears that had filled his eyes, she felt a surge of empathy, a quiet understanding that reached beyond words. He had tried to save Hank, had done everything he could, but fate had intervened, leaving them both to grapple with the loss, each in their own way. For years, she had wondered about that night, had felt a lingering sense of gratitude and sorrow. But now, she felt something more, a release, a sense of peace that filled the spaces where her grief had once held sway. Opening her eyes, she looked around the office, the familiar hum of activity, a comforting backdrop as she allowed herself to feel, to process the layers of emotion that had surfaced in the wake of Mr. Hendricks's confession. She felt the loss, the sorrow, the love she had carried for her son, but alongside it, she felt a quiet strength, a resilience that had grown in the shadows, a reminder of the journey she had undertaken to rebuild her life. A few moments later, Mindy approached, her expression soft as she placed a comforting hand on Laura's shoulder. She didn't ask any questions, didn't pry, but her presence was a reminder that Laura wasn't alone, that she had people who cared, who understood. "Are you all right?" Mindy asked gently, her eyes filled with concern as she studied Laura's face. Laura managed a small smile, her hand resting over Mindy's in a gesture of quiet gratitude. "I am," she replied, her voice steady. "More than I've been in a long time." Mindy nodded, a soft smile tugging at her lips as she gave Laura's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve peace, Laura." As Mindy returned to her desk, Laura felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of belonging that made the office feel less like a place of work and more like a sanctuary, a place where she could let down her walls, be herself, and find solace in the presence of those who had become a part of her journey. She looked down at the photograph of Hank once more, her heart swelling with love as she traced the outline of his face, the curve of his smile. She would always carry him with her, his memory a light that guided her, that reminded her of the beauty and fragility of life. The grief would never fully fade. She knew that. But now she could hold it with a sense of acceptance, a quiet understanding that allowed her to move forward, to embrace the life she had built, the love she had found. A soft knock at her desk pulled her from her thoughts, and she looked up to see Mr. Hendrick standing there, his gaze filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope. He looked as if he had something more to say, a final word left unspoken, and she gestured for him to sit, her heart steady as she met his gaze. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their shared grief filling the air, an unspoken connection that bound them together in ways they hadn't fully understood until now. Mr. Hendricks took a deep breath, his hands clasped in his lap as he looked at her, his voice soft, filled with a quiet humility. "Thank you, Laura," he murmured, his eyes shining with emotion, "for letting me share this with you, for giving me a chance to be part of your story, even in this small way." Laura reached out, placing her hand over his, her touch gentle, reassuring. "You didn't just share in my story, Mr. Hendricks. You were there in the darkest moment of my life, and you gave me hope when I had none. That's not a small thing. That's everything." A tear slipped down his cheek, and he nodded, his gaze filled with gratitude, with a sense of peace that mirrored her own. I wish I could have done more. I wish I could have saved him." She shook her head, a soft, sad smile playing on her lips as she looked at him, her heart full of compassion. "You did everything you could, and in the end, that was enough. You gave me strength, Mr. Hendricks, and I will always be grateful for that." They shared a final, quiet look, a sense of understanding passing between them, a bond that would remain, unspoken yet profound, a reminder of the journey they had undertaken, the healing they had found in each other's presence. As Mr. Hendricks rose to leave, he paused, looking back at her with a soft smile, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. "Take care, Laura, and thank you for everything." She watched him go, her heart filled with a sense of closure, a peace that settled within her, a gentle reminder that she was not alone in her grief, that there were people who cared, who understood. And as she turned back to her desk, her gaze resting on the photograph of Hank, she knew that she had found something precious, something that went beyond the pain, beyond the sorrow. She had found acceptance, a way to carry her memories with love, with gratitude, a way to honor her son while embracing the life she had been given. With a soft smile, she placed the photograph back in its spot, her heart full, her mind clear, ready to face whatever lay ahead. She was Melly, she was Laura, and she was whole. And in that moment, she knew that she would carry the memory of Hank, the kindness of Mr. Hendricks, and the love of her friends with her, a light that would guide her, always. Chapter 30. The Unseen Connections. Part 1. Ross's Revelation. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Ross Given's corner office, casting long shadows across his polished desk. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out over the cityscape that stretched before him. It was an expansive view, one he often found grounding. But today, his mind was elsewhere, his thoughts tangled in a revelation that had shaken him to his core. Laura Owens, his brilliant business analyst, the person he had come to admire more than anyone in his professional life, was Melly. The realization still left him breathless. He couldn't seem to reconcile the image of the strong, resilient woman he had come to know with the memory of the girl he'd met years ago at the school for the blind. Back then, she had been young and unassuming, navigating her world with a confidence that went beyond what he'd ever expected. She'd left a lasting impression on him even then, and now, to realize that she was here, that he had unknowingly crossed paths with her once more, it was almost too much to believe. Ross exhaled deeply, his mind racing as he pieced together the threads of their history, the invisible connections that had linked them through time. He could still remember the day he'd met her, the young girl named Melly who had captivated him with her intelligence, her courage. She had been attending a special program at a school for the blind, and he had been there on behalf of a charity his company sponsored, giving a talk about career opportunities for people with disabilities. It had been an ordinary day in many ways, yet he remembered it with an unusual clarity. He remembered the way Melly had stood out among her classmates, her presence quiet yet powerful, her questions thoughtful and precise. She hadn't needed sight to see clearly, to understand with a depth that belied her years. He had admired her spirit, her determination, and he had often thought of her in the years since, wondering what path she had taken, where life had led her. And now, to discover that she had become the very person who had so thoroughly reshaped Givenscorp's future, who had brought such innovation and heart into his company, it was almost poetic, like a story crafted by fate. He ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head in wonder as he continued to gaze out at the city, the skyline a blur as memories of Melly drifted through his mind. He could still see her face, still hear her voice as she'd asked him questions about the business world, about what it meant to lead, to make an impact. She had been fearless, even then, her curiosity unrestrained, her intellect sharp and probing. And though their conversation had been brief, it had left a mark on him, had reminded him of the importance of his work, of the ways his company could make a difference. Over the years, Ross had met countless people, had spoken at numerous events, but Melly had stayed with him, her image lingering in the recesses of his mind, a quiet reminder of the power of resilience, of courage. And now, to learn that she was Laura, it was as if a puzzle piece had clicked into place, revealing a picture he hadn't known he'd been assembling. Turning away from the window, Ross walked back to his desk, lowering himself into the leather chair as he considered all he had learned. His admiration for Laura had been growing steadily since she joined Givenscorp, her insights and ideas revitalizing the company in ways he hadn't anticipated. She had a knack for finding innovative solutions, for identifying opportunities that others had missed. But now, in light of this revelation, his admiration transformed into something deeper, a respect rooted in understanding. She had navigated two worlds, the world of darkness and the world of light. She had built a life for herself, had taken on challenges that most people couldn't fathom, and she had done it all with a quiet grace that left him in awe. He couldn't help but feel a pang of humility, a realization that he had underestimated her journey, her strength. To think of what she had endured, the journey from Melly to Laura, filled him with both sorrow and admiration. Ross leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk as he steepled his fingers, his gaze distant. He wondered if she had ever thought of their meeting all those years ago, if she had connected him to her past, or if the memory had faded in the face of all she had experienced. Had she remembered the man who had spoken to her, who had encouraged her dreams? Or had he been just another visitor, a fleeting presence in a life filled with challenges and change? He could only imagine the courage it must have taken for her to reinvent herself, to embrace a new world after years of darkness. The thought made his heart ache with a quiet, unspoken gratitude. Gratitude for her resilience, her strength, and for the gift she had unknowingly given him. She had reminded him of his purpose, had shown him the importance of compassion, of understanding. And now, as he looked back on their shared history, he felt a deep sense of responsibility, a desire to honor the journey she had undertaken, to ensure that her contributions were recognized, celebrated. He glanced down at the photograph on his desk, a recent picture of the Givenscorp team at a company event. Laura stood in the front row, her smile warm, her posture relaxed, and he felt a surge of pride, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she was part of his company, that her journey had led her to him once more. She had overcome so much, had defied the odds in ways he could only admire, and he knew that he was lucky to have her, that Givenscorp was better because of her. As he continued to reflect, his thoughts drifted back to the day they had almost met, the picnic that had been interrupted by a sudden thunderstorm, the laughter and camaraderie that had filled the office as they joked about the Givens curse. He had thought at the time that it was merely a humorous coincidence, a playful jest that had lightened the mood. But now, he saw it differently. It was as if fate itself had been weaving their lives together, guiding them toward this moment, this realization. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze focused on the photograph as he considered what he would say to her, how he would express the depth of his admiration, his gratitude. He wanted her to know that she wasn't just an employee, wasn't just a name on the company roster. She was a part of Givenscorp's legacy, a testament to the power of resilience, of courage. And he wanted her to feel that, to understand how much she meant to him, to the company, to everyone who had been touched by her kindness, her wisdom. The sunlight continued to filter through the windows, casting a warm glow over his office. and Ross felt a sense of peace settle within him, a quiet acceptance of the unseen connections that had shaped their lives. He was grateful for the journey, for the chance to know her, to learn from her. And as he sat there, reflecting on the paths they had traveled, he knew that he would do everything in his power to honor her story, to celebrate her contributions, to ensure that her legacy would endure. For in the end, it wasn't just about their shared past. It was about the future they would build together, the impact they would make, the lives they would touch. And as he looked forward, he felt a quiet, profound sense of purpose, a determination to make the most of the second chance he had been given, a chance to walk alongside her, to support her, to learn from her. In that moment, Ross knew that their connection was more than coincidence, more than happenstance. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the power of kindness, of compassion. And he would carry that with him, a light that would guide him, a reminder of the woman who had taught him to see the world anew. Part 2. A Shared History unfolds. Laura and Ross sat across from each other in his office, the weight of their shared history settling around them like a familiar, comforting blanket. Though the silence hung between them, it was a silence filled with understanding, with the mutual recognition of all they had experienced, all the invisible threads that had bound their lives together over the years. Ross's eyes, filled with a mixture of awe and warmth, met Laura's, and he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk as he searched her face for signs of the young girl he had met all those years ago. That she had been Melly, the brave, insightful girl who had questioned him so directly at the school, seemed both surreal and yet perfectly aligned. It was as if all the pieces of his life had finally fallen into place, and he could see the whole picture clearly for the first time. Laura. Melly, he began, the name still feeling new, unfamiliar, yet filled with significance. I can hardly believe it. To think that you and I, that we've been connected all along. She smiled softly, the gentle curve of her lips filled with understanding, as though she, too, was still coming to terms with the revelation. It's strange, isn't it? She murmured, her gaze drifting to the window, to the sunlight streaming in, casting warm rays across the office. To realize that the person who had such an impact on me back then would be standing here with me now, unknowingly guiding me all this time. Ross nodded, his expression thoughtful as he leaned back, folding his hands in his lap. I remember that day so clearly. You were extraordinary. You stood out, even then. I was struck by how you seemed to know what you wanted from life, how you approached every question with a depth I hadn't expected. Laura chuckled softly, a hint of nostalgia in her eyes as she remembered the younger version of herself, the girl who had faced the world with courage, with an openness that sometimes surprised even her. I remember being a little overwhelmed that day. Here was this CEO, this person who had achieved so much standing in front of me, and I just thought, I want to be able to ask him anything. And somehow, I found the courage. Ross smiled, his eyes warm as he regarded her, a sense of pride in his expression. And you did. You asked questions that most people wouldn't have dared to ask. You made me think. You made me remember why I wanted to do this work in the first place. A comfortable silence fell between them, and Laura took a deep breath, the sense of connection between them filling the room, a shared history that had been hidden, unseen, yet undeniably real. She thought of the years she had spent, unaware of the link that bound her to Ross, of the countless ways he had influenced her life without either of them realizing it. Ross cleared his throat, his voice soft as he continued. I remember thinking that day that you were going to do something remarkable, that you would go on to change lives. And seeing you here now, seeing everything you've done, it's more than I could have imagined. Laura's gaze softened, a quiet humility in her expression as she looked down, her fingers tracing idle patterns on the surface of his desk. I don't know if I've done anything remarkable, she said, her tone modest, unassuming. I've just tried to do the best I could, to make a difference, even if it's in small ways. Ross shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. You've done more than that, Laura. You've brought this company to life. You've given Givens Corp a purpose beyond profit. You've made people believe that what they do matters, that their work has meaning. That's more than remarkable. A blush rose to her cheeks, and she looked away, a mixture of pride and embarrassment flickering in her eyes. She had never thought of her work that way, had never allowed herself to believe that she was anything more than just another employee. But hearing it from Ross, knowing that he saw her in that light, it felt like a validation, a recognition of all she had strived for. As the weight of their shared history settled into something quieter, more comfortable, Ross chuckled, the sound warm, filled with amusement. "You know," he began, his tone playful. "It's ironic, isn't it? After all those near misses, all those times we almost met, only to be thwarted by one ridiculous thing after another. I think we might have set a record for the longest-running game of hide-and-seek in corporate history." Laura laughed, the sound bright, genuine, as she nodded in agreement. "The Givens curse," she said, grinning as she crossed her arms. "I don't think anyone's going to forget that anytime soon." Ross joined her laughter, the sound filling the room, the tension between them dissolving as they shared the humor of the situation. "You know, I started to think that maybe fate was playing a trick on us, that for some reason, the universe didn't want us to meet." "Well," Laura replied, her eyes gleaming with mischief, "I'm just glad we finally broke the curse. I think the entire office was rooting for this moment." Ross smiled, a sense of warmth filling him as he looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "It's strange," he said softly, his gaze contemplative. "All this time you've been right here, working beside me, and I had no idea. And now that I know, it feels like everything makes sense." Laura nodded, a quiet understanding in her expression as she met his gaze, her voice soft, filled with sincerity. "It does, doesn't it? It's like we were meant to find each other, even if it took years, even if it happened in ways neither of us could have predicted." They shared a smile, a moment of mutual understanding that went beyond words, an acknowledgement of the journey they had taken, the invisible threads that had bound them together, unseen yet undeniable. It was a connection that had been there all along, waiting to be discovered, to be recognized. As the laughter faded, Ross's expression grew serious, his gaze steady as he looked at her, his voice filled with quiet respect. "Laura, I want you to know that your presence here has changed everything. Not just for the company, but for me, personally. You've reminded me of the importance of empathy, of resilience, of all the things that truly matter. And I want you to know that I see you, for everything you are, for everything you've brought to this place." A lump formed in Laura's throat, and she blinked back tears, her heart swelling with gratitude, with a sense of belonging that went beyond words. "Thank you, Ross," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. That means more to me than I can say." They sat in silence, the moment stretching between them, filled with unspoken emotions, with the quiet understanding that only two people who had shared a journey of unseen connections could know. And as they looked at each other, they both knew that this was only the beginning, that their shared history, their bond, would guide them forward, shaping the future in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The Givens curse had been broken, and in its place, there was a connection, a story, a future that held endless possibilities. And as they both leaned back, laughter and warmth filling the air, they knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, hand in hand, bound by the invisible threads of their past. Chapter 31. Moving Forward. Part 1. Embracing Melly and Laura. The office buzzed with its usual rhythm, phones ringing, the murmur of conversations, the quiet clacking of keyboards. But today, Laura felt a calm settle over her, a new sense of completeness she hadn't realized she'd been searching for. She sat at her desk, her hands folded in her lap as she took in her surroundings, feeling as if she were seeing everything through fresh eyes. The journey of the past few weeks had changed her, and though she was still the same person, there was a new depth to her sense of self, a newfound acceptance that encompassed both Melly and Laura, two sides of her identity that had finally merged into one. For so long, she had lived in two worlds, First is Melly, a girl navigating the darkness with an open heart and fierce independence. And later as Laura, the business analyst, a woman learning to navigate a world of light and sight with curiosity and courage. But now, those worlds no longer felt separate. She could feel them blending, each part enriching the other, weaving together into a single, cohesive story that was hers alone. As she closed her eyes, memories of her transition from darkness to sightedness washed over her, vivid and visceral. The years as Melly had been formative in ways she had only recently begun to acknowledge, and as she delved back into those memories, she could feel the world of sound and touch, a 360-degree experience that had shaped her, filling her senses once more. When she had been blind, the world had been immersive, her senses expanding in every direction, gathering information from every corner of her environment. Every footstep, every brush of fabric, the faintest whisper of wind, all of it had painted a picture in her mind, a three-dimensional reality that had given her freedom and understanding. Even now, she could remember the way the air would shift, how she could feel the contours of a room, the placement of objects, the people within it. It had been a world of intuition, of trust, and though she hadn't had sight, she had never felt limited. The decision to pursue the surgery had been fraught with emotion, a choice that had both excited and terrified her. She had dreamed of seeing the world, of experiencing the beauty of colors, of sunsets and city lights, of the faces of the people she loved. But she had also known that by choosing sight, she would be stepping into a new reality, one that would require her to leave behind a part of herself. She remembered the day of the surgery vividly, the sterile brightness of the hospital room, the quiet hum of medical equipment, the reassuring voices of the nurses and doctors who had surrounded her. There had been a calm anticipation in the air, a sense of hope that filled her heart with both longing and trepidation. She had held on to that hope, allowing it to steady her, to carry her through the uncertainty. When she had first opened her eyes after the surgery, everything had felt overwhelming, a rush of colors and shapes that blurred together, each one vying for her attention. She had expected sight to feel natural, to fall into place like an instinct. But it hadn't been like that at all. Instead, she had felt as though she were learning a new language, each image a word, each color a phrase, all unfamiliar, yet deeply alluring. At first, the world had felt strangely flat, as if the three-dimensional space she had known had been compressed into 2 dimensions, everything limited to what was directly in front of her. Her field of vision had felt restricted, confining, and she remembered the frustration that had built up within her as she struggled to understand, to adapt. It was as if her world had narrowed, her senses overwhelmed by the onslaught of visual information, the vast panoramic world of sound and touch reduced to what her eyes could perceive. She had felt disoriented, unbalanced, unable to trust her vision the way she had trusted her other senses. The adjustment had been slow, painstaking, each day a challenge as she learned to decipher what her eyes were telling her, to bridge the gap between her 2 worlds. Yet, amidst the frustration, there had been moments of wonder, moments when the light would catch on a leaf, illuminating the delicate veins, or when she would see the play of shadows on a wall, the subtle shifts of color as the sun moved across the sky. She remembered the first time she saw her own reflection, the way her breath had caught as she stared at the girl in the mirror, the girl who was both familiar and foreign. The process of rehabilitation had been grueling, each session a mix of triumph and despair as she learned to navigate the world anew. She had spent hours practicing basic tasks, learning to judge distance, to recognize shapes and faces, to trust her vision as she had once trusted her other senses. It had been humbling, a reminder that even the simplest things could be complex, could require patience and perseverance. There were days when she had wanted to give up, days when she had wondered if she had made the right choice. But each time doubt crept in, she had thought of the life she wanted, the dreams she had yet to fulfill. She had reminded herself that this was her journey, that every struggle, every setback, was a step toward becoming the person she was meant to be. And now, as she sat here, in the quiet of her office, she felt a sense of pride, a quiet strength that had been forged in the fires of those challenges. She had walked between 2 worlds, had learned to see not only with her eyes, but with her heart, with the intuition that had guided her in the darkness. She was Melly, the girl who had navigated a world of sound and touch. And she was Laura, the woman who had learned to embrace the beauty of sight. The two parts of her identity no longer felt separate. They were woven together, a tapestry of experiences that had shaped her, each thread a testament to her resilience, her courage. She could feel the presence of Melly within her, the girl who had faced the world with an open heart, with a fierce determination to thrive. And she could feel the presence of Laura, the woman who had learned to navigate the complexities of the corporate world, who had found her place, her purpose. She took a deep breath, a smile playing on her lips as she glanced around her office, her gaze settling on the photograph of Hank she kept on her desk. Her son's memory was a part of this journey, a reminder of the love and loss that had shaped her, that had given her the strength to carry on, even in the face of unimaginable pain. He was with her, a quiet presence that guided her, that reminded her of the beauty and fragility of life. For the first time, she felt truly whole, a sense of unity that went beyond sight, beyond sound. She was Melly and Laura, two sides of the same person, each one complementing the other, enriching her understanding of herself and the world around her. She could feel the strength of her past, the resilience that had carried her through the darkest of days, and the hope of her future, a future filled with possibility, with dreams yet to be realized. As she sat there reflecting on her journey, she felt a sense of peace settle within her, a quiet acceptance that filled her with gratitude, with a love that encompassed both the girl she had been and the woman she had become. She was ready to move forward, to embrace the future with open arms, to live fully, authentically, guided by the lessons she had learned, the strength she had found. In that moment, Laura knew that she had found her purpose, her place in the world. She was a bridge between two worlds, a testament to the power of resilience, of courage. And as she looked out the window, watching the sunlight play across the cityscape, she felt a quiet confidence, a certainty that whatever lay ahead, she would face it with grace, with strength, with the unwavering belief that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Laura was ready to embrace her future, to carry the memories, the lessons, the love that had brought her here. She was Melly, she was Laura, and she was whole. And as she rose from her desk, her heart filled with gratitude, she knew that she would carry this moment with her, a light that would guide her, a reminder of the journey that had shaped her, the life she was meant to live. Part 2. A New Path. The late afternoon light filtered through Ross Given's office, casting a soft glow across the shelves and the neat stacks of files on his desk. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on Laura, who sat across from him, her posture relaxed, her expression calm yet curious. The day had been filled with meetings, the usual hustle of Givens Corp pressing forward, but for both Ross and Laura, there was a newfound ease in their connection, an unspoken understanding that had deepened since they'd acknowledged their shared past. Ross's admiration for Laura had only grown, and as he looked at her now, he saw not only the accomplished business analyst she had become, but the resilient young woman who had navigated so much in her life, finding her place in the world with both grace and strength. And he knew, with a quiet certainty, that Givens Corp needed her vision, her insight, her resilience. She had already transformed the company in so many ways, and he was ready to acknowledge her role more formally, to offer her a place that reflected her impact. "Laura," he began, his voice steady but warm. "I've been thinking a lot about everything you've done here at Givens Corp, about the way you've helped shape this place into something better, something stronger. Your work, your insights, your perspective. It's been invaluable." Laura's gaze softened, a faint blush coloring her cheeks as she looked down, the quiet humility that Ross had come to admire in her evident in the small, grateful smile that played on her lips. "Thank you, Ross. That means a lot coming from you." He nodded, his expression thoughtful as he continued. "But I think you know as well as I do that you're capable of even more. You have a vision, Laura, a way of seeing things that goes beyond what most people can comprehend, and I believe that vision deserves to be recognized, to be given a platform where it can truly flourish." Laura's eyebrows rose slightly, her curiosity piqued as she leaned forward, her hands resting in her lap. "What are you saying, Ross?" He smiled, a hint of excitement flickering in his eyes as he gestured toward the cityscape outside, the vast expanse of buildings and streets that lay beyond the glass. I'm saying that Givens Corp needs more than just another business analyst. It needs a leader, someone who understands not only the mechanics of the business, but the heart of it, the people, the purpose. And I believe you're that person. The weight of his words settled over her, a mixture of surprise and awe filling her as she looked at him, her gaze searching his for any hint of hesitation. But there was none. He looked back at her with a steady, unwavering confidence, a quiet pride that spoke of his belief in her, his trust in her ability to lead. "Ross, she began, her voice trailing off as she struggled to find the right words. "I never expected... it's an honor, truly. But are you sure? I'm not exactly what most people would think of when they imagine a corporate leader." Ross chuckled, his gaze warm, his tone filled with sincerity. "Laura, that's exactly why I believe you're the right choice. You see things differently. You approach problems with empathy, with a depth that's rare in this field. You've been through so much, and it's given you a resilience, a strength that I don't see in most people, and it's exactly that strength that Givens Corp needs." She felt her heart swell with gratitude, with a sense of validation that went beyond professional achievement. It was as though Ross had seen her, truly seen her, for everything she was, not just as an employee, but as a person, a leader, someone with a story worth telling. Taking a deep breath, she met his gaze, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you, Ross. I don't know what to say. This isn't something I ever thought would happen, and it's overwhelming, in the best possible way." He smiled, nodding as he leaned forward, his hands resting on his desk as he looked at her, his gaze filled with encouragement. "You don't have to say anything right now. I just want you to know that the opportunity is here, that I believe in you, and that if you're ready, we can take Givens Corp to places we've never even dreamed of." Laura took a moment, her mind racing as she considered the implications of his offer, the doors it would open, the impact it could have. She thought of all the people she had worked with, the projects she had led, the changes she had implemented, and she realized that she was ready, that this was the culmination of everything she had worked for, everything she had become. With a deep breath, she nodded, a smile spreading across her face as she looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. "I'd like that, Ross. I'd like to be a part of something bigger, to help shape the future of this company." They shared a smile, a moment of mutual understanding that went beyond words, a connection that had been years in the making, bound by their shared history, their respect for each other, their shared vision for Givens Corp. As the conversation continued, they began to discuss the specifics, the ways in which Laura could contribute, the projects she could lead, the teams she could guide. Their ideas flowed easily, a rhythm developing between them as they explored the possibilities, each one more exciting than the last. They talked about restructuring departments, implementing new initiatives, finding innovative solutions to long-standing challenges. With each new idea, they found common ground, their perspectives blending into a shared vision that felt both ambitious and achievable. The hours passed in a blur, their enthusiasm carrying them forward as they mapped out a future that felt brighter, more dynamic, a future that reflected their combined strengths, their shared passion for making a difference. And as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the office, they paused, both of them leaning back, a satisfied silence settling over them as they took in the magnitude of what they had discussed. Ross looked over at her, his expression filled with quiet admiration as he spoke. "You know, Laura, I think this is just the beginning. With you on board in a leadership role, I believe we can truly transform Givens Corp, and I want you to know that I'll be here, supporting you every step of the way." A soft smile played on her lips, her eyes filled with gratitude as she looked back at him, her heart full. "Thank you, Ross. That means more to me than you know. I'm excited, more than I thought I would be. I feel like I'm finally where I'm meant to be." He nodded, his gaze steady, filled with a warmth that went beyond professional respect. "You are, Laura. and I couldn't be prouder to have you by my side." They sat in silence for a moment, the quiet weight of their shared history filling the room, a reminder of the journey they had taken to reach this point. And as they looked out at the city, the lights beginning to twinkle against the darkening sky, they both felt a sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing they were exactly where they were meant to be. The silence was broken by a soft laugh from Ross, his gaze filled with a mixture of humor and nostalgia as he looked back at her. "You know, it's funny. All those near misses, all the times we almost met but didn't. Maybe it was meant to be this way. Maybe the Givens curse was just fate's way of bringing us here, to this moment." Laura chuckled, nodding as she remembered the countless times she had tried to meet him, only to be thwarted by one absurd event after another. "I think you might be right. It's like we were both on a path, but we had to take the long way around to get here, and honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way." They shared a laugh, their connection deepening as they reminisced about the journey that had brought them together, the twists and turns, the moments of frustration and humor that had made it all the more meaningful. As the evening drew to a close, Laura felt a sense of fulfillment, a quiet joy that filled her with anticipation for the future. She was ready to step into this new role, to embrace the challenges, the opportunities, the chance to make a difference. And as she looked over at Ross, she knew that she wasn't alone, that she had a partner, a friend, someone who believed in her, who understood her journey, who was ready to walk beside her. They rose from their seats, a sense of closure settling over them as they prepared to leave. But as they reached the door, Ross turned to her, his expression thoughtful, his gaze filled with a quiet intensity. "Laura," he said softly, his voice steady, filled with sincerity, "I just want you to know that this isn't just about Givens Corp. This is about you, about everything you've brought into my life, everything you've taught me. You've shown me what it means to lead with compassion, with empathy, and I'll always be grateful for that." A lump formed in her throat, and she blinked back tears, her heart swelling with gratitude, with a sense of purpose that went beyond her role, beyond the company. "Thank you, Ross. I feel the same. You've given me a chance to be myself, to grow, to make a difference, and I'll always be grateful for that." They shared a final look, a moment of mutual respect, of friendship, of a connection that would guide them forward, that would shape the future they would build together. And as they stepped out into the evening, the city lights casting a warm glow over them, Laura felt a quiet confidence, a certainty that whatever lay ahead, she was ready. She was Melly, she was Laura, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. And with Ross by her side, she knew that the future held endless possibilities, a world of opportunity waiting to be discovered. Chapter 32. New Beginnings. Part 1. Embracing Laura and Melly. The early morning sun streamed through the windows of Givens Corp, filling the office with a warm, golden glow. Laura sat at her new desk, the polished wood and neatly organized files before her a testament to the journey that had brought her here. It had been a week since she'd stepped into her new role, a transition met with excitement, laughter, and an overwhelming show of support from her colleagues. They had embraced her wholeheartedly, not just as Laura Owens, their business analyst, but as Melly, the girl who had navigated a different world, one they were only beginning to understand. The Givens curse, once a running joke, was now a shared memory that seemed to unite them all. Her co-workers had seen her through near misses, frustrating encounters, and comic misunderstandings, and now they looked at her with a mix of admiration and respect, eager to know more about the woman who had come to represent resilience and strength in ways that had touched them all. As she looked around the office, Laura felt a surge of gratitude for the people who had become her second family. There was Adam, the ever-jovial colleague who had turned the Givens curse into a stand-up routine, Sharon, who had taken on the role of cheerleader with fervor, and of course, Mindy, whose journey from rival to friend had been one of the most surprising transformations of all. Mindy now sat across from her, leaning forward with a genuine smile, her eyes filled with curiosity and warmth. "So, Laura," Mindy began, her voice tinged with excitement, "I think it's time you tell us more about Melly. I mean, we all know you as Laura, the no-nonsense analyst who somehow managed to turn our department into a powerhouse. But I think we'd love to hear more about, well, the whole picture. A small laugh escaped Laura, and she felt a warmth rise in her chest, a sense of comfort that came from knowing she could finally share her story openly, without fear of misunderstanding or judgment. She took a deep breath, glancing around the group gathered around her desk, each face filled with anticipation. "Well," she began, her voice steady but soft. "Melly was my first name. Melissa. Growing up blind, I had to navigate the world differently, and I think that shaped me in ways I didn't fully understand until I gained my sight. Everything was a 360-degree experience back then. Sounds, touch, even the way I could feel people's presence in a room. It was all-encompassing in a way that vision couldn't match." The group listened intently, their expressions a mixture of awe and fascination as she described her experience, the way she had learned to see without sight, to navigate the world with a confidence that went beyond physical vision. She could feel their curiosity, their desire to understand, and it filled her with a quiet sense of pride, a satisfaction in knowing that they wanted to know the real her. "I never imagined I'd gain my sight," Laura continued, her gaze drifting as she remembered those first overwhelming days after her surgery. "And when it happened, it was like being thrust into a whole new reality. Suddenly, everything was flat, limited to what was directly in front of me. I missed the depth, the way sounds could paint an entire room, the way I could feel the air shift as people moved around me. Learning to rely on sight felt like learning a new language, and for a while, I felt lost." Mindy, sitting closest to her, reached out, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Laura, I had no idea," she murmured, her voice filled with empathy. "You went through so much, and yet you made it seem so effortless." Laura smiled, grateful for the kindness in Mindy's gaze, the sincerity that had replaced the rivalry that had once defined their relationship. "Thank you, Mindy. Honestly, there were times I wanted to give up. I felt like I'd lost a part of myself, like I was leaving behind the world that had made me who I was. But eventually, I learned to blend those worlds, to see not only with my eyes, but with my heart, with the intuition that had guided me in the darkness." The office had grown silent, everyone listening closely, their expressions soft, touched by her words. She looked around, feeling a connection with each of them, a bond that went beyond their roles as co-workers, that reached into something deeper, something human. Adam, his usual humor replaced with quiet admiration, spoke up. "Laura, I think I speak for everyone when I say that we're all incredibly lucky to have you here, to be able to work with someone who has faced so much and come out the other side even stronger. You're not just a leader, you're an inspiration." A blush rose to her cheeks, and she looked down, a small, humbled smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you, Adam. That means more to me than you know." As the words sank in, she noticed Mindy's gaze drifting, a look of introspection crossing her face. She seemed lost in thought, her expression softened with an emotion Laura recognized, the quiet sorrow of someone who had witnessed hardship, who understood the struggles of those who navigated the world differently. "Mindy," Laura began gently, "you seem deep in thought. Is there something on your mind?" Mindy looked up, her gaze meeting Laura's, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Actually, yes. I was just thinking about my brother, James. He's blind, and like you, he's been through a lot. Watching you, hearing your story, it reminds me of him, of the strength it takes to face the world with everything stacked against you." Laura's eyes softened, a quiet understanding passing between them as she listened, her heart touched by the vulnerability in Mindy's voice. "He's an accountant," Mindy continued, her tone filled with pride. "And he's good at what he does. He's always had this determination, this resilience that I see in you. Growing up, I never fully understood what he went through, the struggles he faced. But watching you, it's opened my eyes in ways I hadn't expected. I think I see now just how much he must have had to overcome." Laura reached out, placing a comforting hand on Mindy's arm, her voice filled with warmth. "It sounds like James is an incredible person, and you, You're an incredible sister, Mindy. I know it hasn't always been easy between us, but I'm grateful for this journey we've shared. It's taught me so much, not just about myself, but about the power of connection, of understanding. Mindy smiled, a hint of emotion in her eyes as she looked at Laura, her voice soft. Thank you, Laura. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm proud to work under you, to support you in any way I can. You've shown me that strength comes in many forms, and I'm grateful for that. The sincerity in her words filled Laura with a deep sense of fulfillment, a gratitude that went beyond words. The people around her weren't just colleagues, they were friends, allies, each one a part of the journey that had brought her to this place, this moment. As the conversation continued, her coworkers shared their own stories, their own experiences, each one a testament to the resilience, the determination that had defined their lives. They laughed, reminisced, their bond growing stronger as they opened up, as they shared the parts of themselves that had remained unseen, unknown. And through it all, Laura felt a sense of belonging, a feeling of acceptance that went beyond her role, her position. She was both Laura and Melly, a blend of two worlds, two identities that had finally merged into one. She could feel the support of her team, the encouragement that flowed from each of them, a reminder that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the morning drew on, the group began to disperse, each person returning to their tasks, their roles, but the warmth of their connection lingered, filling the office with a quiet sense of camaraderie, of unity. Laura watched them go, a smile playing on her lips as she felt a renewed sense of purpose, a certainty that she was ready to lead, to guide them forward, to embrace the future with an open heart. Mindy lingered, her gaze thoughtful as she looked at Laura, a soft smile on her lips. Thank you, Laura, for sharing your story, for being, well, you. I think I finally understand what James meant when he said that strength isn't just about what you can do, but about how you face the world. You've shown me that in ways I can't put into words. Laura placed a hand on her shoulder, her gaze filled with warmth, with gratitude. And thank you, Mindy, for standing by me, for supporting me. I couldn't ask for a better team, a better friend. They shared a quiet smile, a moment of mutual respect, of understanding, a bond that went beyond their titles, their roles, a connection that was both professional and personal. As Mindy returned to her desk, Laura sat back, a sense of peace settling over her as she looked around the office, the place that had become her home, her sanctuary. She was ready to lead, to inspire, to make a difference. And as she looked out the window, the sun shining brightly over the city, she felt a quiet confidence, a certainty that the future was bright, filled with promise, with endless possibilities. She was Laura, she was Melly, and she was whole. In that moment, she knew that she had found her place, her purpose, and she was ready to embrace it with open arms, to lead her team with strength, with compassion, with the unwavering belief that they could achieve anything, together. And as she turned back to her desk, her heart filled with gratitude, with hope, she knew that this was only the beginning, a new chapter, a new beginning, a future she was ready to embrace. Part 2. Full Circle. The air was crisp and cool as Laura made her way up the familiar path to the school for the blind, the place that had been her sanctuary and her launchpad into the world. She walked with purpose, her heart light, her mind filled with memories of her younger self, Melly, who had once navigated these halls, asking questions and daring to dream. It had been years since she had last set foot here, but every step felt like a homecoming, each memory weaving together her past and present. She paused at the school entrance, taking a moment to gather herself, to absorb the significance of this visit. Givenscorp had organized the talk, hoping to reach out to young students and encourage them to envision futures full of possibility. But for Laura, it was more than a corporate outreach. It was a way to give back, to speak directly to the children who were once like her, standing on the precipice of their futures, hoping and wondering what life had in store. She walked through the hallways, her footsteps echoing softly, the familiar sounds and smells bringing back vivid memories, the scent of polished wood, the quiet murmur of voices, the feel of the cool, tiled floors under her feet. It all felt so familiar, so deeply ingrained in her heart. As she neared the classroom where the students had gathered, she could hear their excited chatter, their eager voices blending together in a melody of anticipation. When she entered, the room quieted, and dozens of faces turned toward her, each one brimming with curiosity, with wonder. She looked at them, young boys and girls of all ages, some seated with their hands folded, others turning their heads toward her, their faces alight with interest. She smiled, feeling a rush of warmth as she remembered sitting in a similar room, listening intently as speakers shared their stories, their dreams. And now, here she was, on the other side of that experience, ready to share her own journey. "Hello, everyone," she began, her voice steady and warm. "My name is Laura Owens, and I'm here on behalf of Givens Corp to talk about careers, about dreams, and about the endless possibilities that lie before each of you." A ripple of excitement passed through the room, and she could see the children leaning forward, their expressions attentive, their hands resting on their desks as they listened. She continued, speaking of her journey, of the challenges she had faced, the struggles she had overcome. She told them about the world of business, about what it meant to work in a place like Givens Corp, to build something meaningful, to contribute to a team. She spoke of her transition from Melly, the girl who had navigated the world through sound and touch, to Laura, the woman who had learned to see with both her eyes and her heart. Each word felt like a thread, weaving together the story of her life, the tapestry of experiences that had shaped her. As she spoke, she noticed a young boy sitting near the front, his posture relaxed, but his expression thoughtful, intense. He reminded her of herself, the way he seemed to absorb each word, to consider every detail, as if he were filing it away, making sense of it in his own way. His hands rested on the desk, his fingers tapping lightly as he listened, his head tilted slightly to one side, his gaze fixed on her with a kind of focus that was both surprising and endearing. When she finished speaking, she opened the floor for questions, inviting the students to ask her anything they wanted. A few hands went up, and she answered their questions with patience, with warmth, enjoying the curiosity, the eagerness that filled the room. But then, she noticed the boy's hand go up, his expression serious as he waited for his turn. "Yes?" she said, nodding toward him, a smile playing on her lips. "What's your name?" "Billy," he replied, his voice clear and confident. "My name is Billy." "Well, Billy," she said, leaning forward slightly, "what would you like to know?" He paused, his expression thoughtful, as if choosing his words carefully. "I want to know, what made you decide to work at Givens Corp? What's it like to be in charge, to make decisions that affect a lot of people?" The question took her by surprise, the depth of it, the insight. It was the kind of question she had asked Ross years ago, a question that spoke of ambition, of curiosity, of a desire to understand the world beyond the boundaries of the classroom. She smiled, her heart swelling with admiration for this young boy who reminded her so much of herself. "That's a great question, Billy," she said, her voice warm. "When I first joined Givens Corp, I didn't know exactly what I was getting into. I was just like you, filled with questions, with curiosity. I wanted to understand how things worked, how I could make a difference. And over time, I found that being in a position of leadership isn't just about making decisions. It's about listening, about understanding the people you work with, about being willing to learn from them." He nodded, absorbing her words, his expression thoughtful. "So, it's not just about being the boss? It's about helping people?" "Exactly," she replied, her smile widening. "Being a leader means being willing to support others, to be there for them when they need guidance, to help them reach their full potential. It's a responsibility, but it's also an honor. And I think you'd be very good at it someday, Billy." A small smile broke across his face, a look of pride flickering in his eyes, and she felt a surge of warmth, a quiet joy in seeing the spark of ambition, the beginning of a dream, taking shape in him. The other children asked their questions, each one filled with enthusiasm, with a desire to learn, to explore. And as she answered them, she felt the room come alive with energy, with excitement, each child absorbing her words, her story, in their own way. When the questions ended, she thanked them, her heart full, knowing that she had shared a part of herself, a part of her journey, with children who could understand, who could relate, who could find inspiration in her story. As she prepared to leave, Billy stood up, a look of determination on his face. "Thank you, Ms. Owens," he said, his voice steady. "I'm going to work hard. I'm going to make a difference, just like you." She felt a lump form in her throat, her eyes bright as she looked at him, her voice soft as she replied, "I know you will, Billy, and I have no doubt that you're going to do amazing things." As she walked out of the room, a quiet peace settled over her, a sense of fulfillment that went beyond words. She had come full circle, had returned to the place where her journey had begun, and now she was leaving with the knowledge that she had given back, had planted a seed of hope, of possibility, in the hearts of children who were just beginning their own journeys. Walking down the familiar hallways, she felt a sense of closure, of contentment, as if the pieces of her life had finally come together, each one a part of a larger, more beautiful picture. And then, just as she reached the door, she heard it. A voice, soft, gentle, a whisper that seemed to come from within, filling her with a warmth that was both familiar and profound. "Lim." She stopped, her heart skipping a beat, the sound of her son's voice echoing in her mind, filling her with a love that transcended time, that bridged the gap between this world and the next. She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek, her lips forming a quiet smile as she felt his presence, his warmth, surrounding her. "Love you too, Hank," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude, with peace. As she opened her eyes, a quiet resolve settled within her, a certainty that Hank's memory, his spirit, would always be with her, guiding her, supporting her as she continued her journey. With one final look at the school, at the place where her story had begun, she turned and walked toward the future, her heart light, her spirit whole, knowing that she was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. She was Laura, she was Melly, and she was filled with the love, the memories, the unseen connections that had shaped her life, guiding her forward with a strength, a resilience, that was both beautiful and unbreakable. The end.